In just the last few weeks, there's been some really disturbing trends with food companies, farmers, and also this global protein shortage in large part to the African swine flu, but it's causing a lot of side effects with others. You also have the food industry with way too much government intervention, misallocation of capital, rules and regulations, large companies like Monsanto and the pharmaceutical companies getting involved, farmers are straddled with debt. So if you have not paid attention, just in the last 2 weeks, two large food companies went bankrupt. So on Tuesday, November 12th, Dean Foods, America's biggest milk producer, filed for bankruptcy, and I'll talk about that in a second, but let me just read the other headline. Yesterday, Bumblebee Foods, which is Bumblebee Tuna, they filed for bankruptcy, and they plan to sell their assets to Taiwan to a Taiwanese company for $925 million. And they went bankrupt for different reasons that are claimed in the articles. And the article for Dean Foods, I'll read the article now. So Dean Foods announced that they filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy on Tuesday, November 12th. Dallas-based milk processor said it is engaged in advanced discussions with the Dairy Farmers of America about a sale. Dean Foods' business has struggled as more consumers turn to non-dairy milk or buy private label products. The other part that's not being discussed, I'll talk about more of the article, but from my conversations with farmers who listen, American farmers, some of them who listen to this podcast, and there's some very generous ones who have sent me some long emails with things that they think I should understand better from their position and experience, is that the milk industry here in the U.S. is very heavily subsidized, and there's a lot of price controls. So if the dairy farmers for milk have higher costs, they're not allowed to pass it on to the consumer. There's strict price controls on a lot of milk items here in the U.S. And also I believe the amount of dairy farms in Wisconsin, I think there's a massive amount of bankruptcy. Let me see here if it's covered in this article. I did read the article, when it came out about 10 days ago. I can't remember if it was mentioned in this article or another article. I think it might have been mentioned in the farmer suicide article that I also have. There's a really sad article about mass wave of farmer suicides. Let me see. I have so many windows open right now. Let me see if I pulled it up. Okay, so for millions of Americans, this was November 10th. Article, for millions of Americans in the middle of the country, it feels like an economic depression right now. What you do when you have lost all hope that things ever turn around. It may still feel like the economy is booming for those at the top end of the economic food chain in big coastal cities such as New York and San Francisco. I would argue many people in the middle class, working class, and poor don't feel that way. But yes, people at the top are still doing well, especially people who have asset prices. So a lot of assets like stocks, bonds, real estate, they've been doing well still. Millions of hardworking Americans in the middle of the country. Talk of a coming recession is absolutely ludicrous because it already feels like a severe economic depression is happening right now. In America's heartland, bankruptcies are surging, debt burdens are becoming overwhelming, and suicide rates are spiking to unprecedented levels. We have not seen such economic despair in this extreme since the last recession. And about to share a story, this article writer with absolutely heartbreaking. South Dakota farmers Chris and Amber Dykeshorn look toward the future with great optimism, but mounting debts and several years of disastrous weather changed all that, and in June, their community was shocked when Chris killed himself. So it was his crop was ruined. He had planted. There was really bad weather. I guess it was too much rain and hail, and he wasn't able to get too much of his crop in. They were already $300,000 in debt. I don't want to read the whole story because it's just so tragic. But the poor guy killed himself, and he left his wife and kids with $300,000 in debt, and he wasn't going to be able to make ends meet anymore. It was just a disaster. But I mean, the farming industry is a mess right now, and a lot of it is because of these large corporations forcing the farmers to take on so much debt in order to do business with them. They have strict guidelines with these large meat producers, Tyson Foods, Monsanto, etc. Then the pharmaceutical companies that are involved. And then you have government with the FDA and the USDA basically doing the bidding of these large corporations. And then there's also price controls in certain industries. There's the sugar subsidy. There's fixing milk prices, which does not allow dairy farmers to pass on price increases to their customers. The Bumblebee Tuna Company actually got in trouble for price fixing. So they tried to raise the price. They got in trouble for that. They got heavy fines. So they shouldn't need to do that, but I'm sure deep down, it didn't say it in the article, but I'm sure if you looked back at the financials of this Bumblebee Tuna Company, that they're a pretty big company. People have seen their products in the grocery stores, that they were having problems with their input costs, with margin compression, with shrinkflation, with stagflation. Their costs were going up globally. So that eats at margins. That's why you see these companies like Campbell Soup and Progresso and others, when they have cans of soup, there's almost no meat in the soup anymore. Things have changed. Like, I remember when I was, not as health conscious, and I would have like that soup, that they would have a lot more meat in there. There was a lot more vegetables. Those days are long gone. It's mostly just like broth, and they put a lot of sugar and salt and other stuff in there, along with either rice or beans and then like noodles, and there's almost no meat or vegetables in any of that soup anymore. So it's anything possible to try to maintain their profit margins. So Wisconsin dairy farmers, the amount of Wisconsin dairy farmers going bankrupt is nuts. According to this article talking about from the mostimportantnews.com from November 10th, and they talked about the specific suicide of that farmer, but all across the Midwest, farms are going under at a staggering rate. According to the vice president of the National Farmers Union, the state of Wisconsin is, quote, losing 2 farms a day at this point. You look at the weather, you look at the crops, you can't get off the field, you look at the bills you can't pay. Patty Edelberg, vice president of the National Farmers Union, told Yahoo Finance, bankruptcies are up. Wisconsin is attributed as the number 1 bankruptcy state in the nation right now when it comes to dairy farmers. That number is up, she says, 24% from last year already. Wow. We're losing 2 farms a day. So if you can believe it, the state of Wisconsin lost almost 1,200 dairy farms between 2016 and 2018, probably because they cannot pass, according to the podcast listener who's a farmer that sent me a bunch of emails 4 or 5 months ago, that they cannot pass on price increases because of price fixing. Government fixes prices for milk and other things. If you believe, okay, back to the article. Overall, the number of dairy farms in the state of Wisconsin has fallen by 49% during the last 15 years. That's nuts. So half of all the dairy farms in our most important dairy producing state are completely gone. And instead of tapering off, this farm apocalypse, or Farmageddon, just continues to pick up speed. Sadly, the bankers are contributing to this crisis in a major way by denying loans to many of these troubled farmers. So it's the crisis is feeding on itself. It's a really disastrous positive feedback loop. So there's a lot of disturbing stories with food companies going bankrupt for different reasons, although I think currency devaluation, using too much debt on the balance sheet, consumer preferences changing. I think Campbell Soup is running TV commercials now. Like, I think they're 10 or 20. I've seen them run a bunch of 10-second TV commercials with like a quick shot of their soup and their logo. That's not going to help them. I think they're in big trouble. That stock revenue was flat for years, 64 times earnings, really horrible debt to equity ratio. Just my opinion, not financial advice. I don't think that company's in good shape. There's other food companies too. So there's an alarming trend. The African swine flu is contributing to the global protein shortage. That's a big reason. I talked about the global protein shortage. Michael Snyder wrote an article on this at the end of October from the Economic Collapse blog. Global authorities brace for worldwide protein shortage after a quarter of the Earth's pigs are wiped out. The African swine fever is killing millions upon millions of pigs all over the world. And and I've heard some people are estimating it's now over 70% of the hog population in mainland China, which means they have to import. This benefits Brazil. I talked about this 4 or 5 months ago, that it would benefit Brazil. There was a food meat processing company called JBA Meats. I think that stock went up more than 3-fold in like 4 or 5 months. It's been correcting the last time I looked at a chart. That was just my opinion for a trade. That's gone up over 3-fold. So China is buying more from Brazil. That was educated guess. That was fairly predictable. That with the trade war and the tariffs and China saying they're not going to buy from American farmers, that China would go to Brazil. Okay, if you paid attention, you made some trades on that, again, you might have made some money. Not financial advice, but congratulations if you did. Maybe you'll be one of my 200 Patreon account contributors soon. Well, almost to 200. Okay, African swine fever killing millions upon millions of pigs all over the world threatens to create a crippling global shortage of protein as we head into 2020. Epidemic began in China last year and is now also running wild in North Korea, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar, and the Philippines. But this crisis is certainly not limited to Asia. According to the Washington Post, so far in 2019, there have also been outbreaks in Belgium, Bulgaria, Hungary, Latvia, Poland, Romania, Russia, and Ukraine. And anecdotally, I'm hearing from podcast listeners that the portion size of pork is dropping. Portion size of bacon at the supermarket is dropping. So the price might not change much, but the portion size, the amount of bacon is dropping. Portion size of restaurant on pork. Portion sizes at restaurants on pork is dropping too. Overall cases of African swine fever have been documented in nearly 50 nations. U.S. pork producers are extremely concerned that it could start spreading here too. So the United States Department of Agriculture, I have articles on this from earlier this year. They have been proactive about trying to block pork imports from China because the Chinese have tried to sneak in, Kyle Bass has talked about this as well, imports for dog food and other things of, bad tainted infected pork. But recently there was an article, a couple articles actually, in South Korea. Fox News had an article that on November 12th, a river near the inter-Korean border ran red after being polluted by blood from pig carcasses. So I believe there was South Korean authorities slaughtered 47,000 pigs to try to halt the spread of African swine fever, according to the BBC. The pigs were in a truck at a burial site near a tributary of the Imjin River, and after heavy rains, the blood... Okay, I don't need to read anymore. So there are these Asian countries. There's Thailand. I have a similar story for Thailand from the end of September. Thailand takes serious measures to screen out African swine fever. And more recently, the story was with Taiwan, how an African swine fever infected dead pig washed up on shore in Taiwan from mainland China. So this story was from November 15th. A floating dead pig infected with African swine fever washed up in Taiwan last week, according to a UN report, which also recorded a fresh mainland China outbreak in an attempt to illegally transport infected pigs. China's swine herd has been devastated by the outbreak of the disease. I've heard estimates. There's some estimates I've seen of 50% or more, but I've seen other people that have been translating Mandarin Chinese speeches from Chinese leaders on Twitter, like commodities traders, professional ones, and they're saying that it's actually over 70% of China's hog population is now dead from African swine fever. And that would explain why the price of pork in China is going crazy. Which also recorded it's more than tripled according to official inflation data from China's National Bureau of Statistics in the last 12 months. She also recorded a fresh mainland China outbreak and attempt to legally transport infected pigs. China's swine herd has been devastated by the outbreak of the disease, first reported by the government in August last year of 2018. An update on the crisis from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations dated Thursday, so this was last week, said the dead pig was found floating on November 6th near Taiwan's Shaojinmen Island, also known as Liu, close to the mainland province of Fujian. Said the pig tested positive for the same strain of swine fever that has unleashed havoc in mainland China. Just crazy stuff. So you have food companies that cannot deal with currency devaluation, tariffs on food, higher input costs, margin compression, too much debt on the balance sheet, consumer preferences changing. They're reducing portion sizes. Normally, they reduce meat and vegetables. You have farmers who are financially getting hurt. The weather, it's been too cold. The Midwest has had much colder weather earlier, starting, I think, at the end of the summer and early fall than in the past. It's been also wetter, so planting seasons are nowhere near as good. The crops have not been planted nearly as much. This is definitely Farmageddon. Or Farm Apocalypse. Okay, so let me take a look at listener questions and comments. I can read more of these articles here, but probably better if I just put links in the information and description section. So these food companies, even with higher food prices, the food companies are not benefiting. The farmers don't seem to be benefiting, really. Most of them, at least. Oh, there's been overfishing. The Japanese and Chinese have dramatically overfished. There's documentaries out about this. What is it? The yellowfin tuna or the bluefin tuna is almost entirely extinct, and there's a bunch of frozen ones sitting in warehouses in Japan. That's like the preferred sushi one. I forget which documentary I saw this in. This was years ago. Helen says farmers are like the silver miners, except Helen, there's even more price controls and subsidies and then you have the large corporations like Monsanto and the drug companies and the large food companies have even more control over the USDA and the FDA. Oh, it's bluefin tuna, yeah. You could just look up bluefin tuna documentary. You should be able to find it. Might have been on Netflix. And there's studies that came out like in the last 6 or 7 years that all the topsoil is going to be ruined in the next 50 years. It's a mess. I mean, there's so many of these stories. It's just tragic. I don't want to read any more of the suicide story. It's too depressing. I don't need to. As much as I like the truth, I don't want to read the story anymore. It's just too depressing. Well, winter is coming. Yeah, that would mean higher prices for food, but it doesn't seem a lot of the farmers are truly going to benefit from this. And it doesn't seem a lot of the food companies are going to truly benefit from this. The food companies, the margins, you can look at the income statement and take a look at their margins. I haven't looked at this in a while, but I didn't see improvement in the margins on the income statement for the food companies. So higher food prices are not. Rufus says radiation in the seafood in Fukushima. Yeah, I agree. I do not like what the Japanese government did. You know, there's with sunflowers and there's phytoremediation, and they could have planted a bunch of sunflowers. Sunflowers actually, I think it's hyperabsorption of radiation. There's a bunch of natural techniques that absorb radiation, and the Japanese government didn't do any of it. They panicked and dumped a lot of the radioactive wastewater back into their food supply. Into the ocean there. It was so dumb. Adrian says higher food prices does cure obesity, unless the food that people eat is total junk. So they still will be unhealthy. So if the only meal you eat is like a hamburger and french fries, a bad one like a McDonald's one, not like grass-fed beef or anything. So if you're saving money eating cheap food, yeah, you're going to end up with like diabetes or a bunch of other health problems. Wendell says he doesn't think obesity will be cured until McDonald's shuts down. Well, yeah, Americans it's not just McDonald's. I mean, McDonald's does have, like, some grilled chicken sandwiches and salads. It's just people don't order them. Not that they're that tasty anyway. But, you know, it's like TV dinners. It's like sugar, salt, fat. It's all these food companies that hire these food chemists. The Sugar, Salt, Fat book is very good. I learned a lot from that book. Yeah, it's fast food, TV dinners, that stuff. Sugar is the worst. The research on sugar, the refined sugar, the research on sugar is really, really bad. And supposedly what, cancer cells feed on carbs and sugar? RMCP says, have you seen suggestions that the United States Department of Agriculture overestimates the yields to keep crop prices lower here to stay competitive on the world market? No, I have not. But it would not surprise me. Isn't there also a scam now? I don't know all the exact details, but there's supposedly a scam now with the Trump administration, so they don't have to pay out the, because remember, they're bailing out the farmers. I think it's 30 billion now in bailouts that Trump has promised to the farmers, but it's nowhere near enough from what I'm hearing, that the farmers have too much debt and, you know, they're so deep in the hole, they haven't planted enough crops, that 30 billion spread out among all these farmers, American farmers in financial trouble, is nowhere near enough. So supposedly the formula calculated for how much bailout money the farmers are getting, because they've lost a lot of business to China, because soybeans and American pork, those were the main export markets, I believe, were China. So supposedly the formula to calculate how much subsidy the farmers, or bailout money the farmers are supposed to get, they've rigged that too. That's what I've heard. Pete Hansen says there is no crop shortage this year. USDA fudges the numbers to keep it quiet. You want to buy me a 24 pack of beers? Thank you. That'll take me a while to drink them because I don't drink that much anymore. If you want to buy me the beers, you can be a Patreon account contributor for $5 a month, or you can send me a super chat. Well, also there's a sugar subsidy. Are you familiar with the sugar subsidy? There's been a sugar subsidy in place for over 100 years. It's really stupid. And then that's why the Coca-Cola and the food companies created high fructose corn syrup, because of the sugar subsidy. Because sugar was too expensive here in the US relative to the global market, because sugar farmers get paid more money than the global price for sugar. That sugar subsidy does not need to be paid anymore. There's so much distortions. People are not aware of this. There's so much distortions from big government and the government agencies in farming and agriculture. Yeah, I stopped drinking soda years ago. It hurts your teeth, but yeah, it is liquid candy. I agree. Off-Road Specialty says Joel Salatin has 2 books that are must-read. None of this is normal. Everything that you want to do is illegal with the food. Yeah. There's government changing the rules. Government's been distorting agriculture markets for over 100 years. The stuff that Herbert Hoover did, and the Congress and the bureaucrats of Herbert Hoover and FDR did in the Great Depression in 1929 was nuts. And Smoot-Hawley with the tariffs, and the stuff Herbert Hoover did was crazy. People were not allowed to lower prices. There were Supreme Court cases about business owners that tried to lower their prices. A lot of farmers were paid to grow crops and then let them die. Crazy stuff. There's tons and tons of examples throughout American history, just in the last 100 years, of really dumb policy decisions with farming and agriculture. Really, really dumb. Harmony says high carb, high sugar, low fat diet is killing people. Yeah. Yeah, I switched to paleo, and I have a couple cheat days per week about a year ago. Low carb almost all the time. A lot of high protein, but lean protein, not too much fat in there, and green vegetables. A lot healthier. All my health tests are much, much better. Best in years. Yeah, that's the thing, Rufus. It's very expensive to eat the healthier meat, the organic fruits and vegetables, and protein. Gematria Code says Bought a tub of yogurt. Nearly a third of the container was without yogurt. Shrinkflation. Yep. Yeah, it's the cost per unit. Also, stories I've heard of cereal and potato chips where a lot of the plastic bag that keeps the potato chips and cereal from going bad, the plastic bag that seals in the food, that a lot of it's air. So they try to keep there's so many tricks done with packaging. Like I posted on my Twitter a couple weeks ago 2 paprikas side by side, and it looks like they've reduced, McCormick Spices has reduced the size of paprika from 11 ounces at different stores down to 8.5, and the marketing and packaging trick is very, very common. People aren't aware of this. I get all these nasty messages and stuff on Twitter and stuff below my videos that you don't know what you're talking about. Like, that one says it's premium. Do you know what retail does? Do you know what restaurants do? They routinely change packaging. It's to fool consumers. Sometimes the ingredients will be totally substituted, as in the ingredients inside something, like a food item at a restaurant or a consumer item, like something at a grocery store. They'll substitute out ingredients. They'll label it on the packaging as premium, and it'll be lower quality at a higher price. Your cost per unit's going up. So they will have substituted out the better ingredients. You don't know it. It says premium on the packaging, and you're paying more cost per unit. The average person doesn't think about this at all. At all. I've tried to explain this to my dad. He doesn't want to hear it. My dad's a doctor, too. He just doesn't want to hear it. I've had long conversations with my dad about this at restaurants, when I run errands with him and have lunch with him sometimes. And if I go shopping with him running errands, because he can't lift all these heavy things, I have to help him out. Yeah, the most common trick is the packaging. That's how they get away with it. The packaging changes. The new buzzword now is premium. So the quality on the item, it could go down a lot, but then they change the packaging. They repackage the consumer item, either a consumer staple item or food item in the grocery store, and then they label it as premium. Thank you, Jarek, for the super chat. I can't really comment on climate change. I'm not an expert on that. I think a lot of the science, though, I think people already have a conclusion in mind, and then I think they reverse engineer. But I'm not an expert on this. Let's just say I'm more skeptical than what all the leading scientists are saying with what they're doing with their conclusion. I think there's a ton of poisons in the air, water, soil. And I think those poisons are causing immense damages. And I think those poisons are not carbon or carbon dioxide. There's a ton of poison. China, I just saw this graphic on Twitter that the 10 most polluted rivers that flow into oceans, none of them are in the United States. It's all India and China. So all the pollution, the majority of the world's pollution, this was measured, plastic bottles, toxic chemicals, they're all coming from India and mainland China. And it's not carbon dioxide. It's crazy amounts of toxic chemicals and plastic bottles and all this other stuff. So the main problem, in my opinion, has more to do with chemicals and other poisons. There's crazy amounts of this stuff in the air, water, soil. And then that gets into the food supply. And these chemical companies, there's tons of lawsuits against them. A lot of times they didn't clean things up like they should. Things have improved in that regard. There's been more cleanups. But initially, this is really bad, especially like in former Soviet Union countries. The Soviet Union destroyed like entire lakes. They just dumped toxic sludge into there. And I forget which lake it is in the Soviet Union. Well, what used to be the Soviet Union. And supposedly if you go across that lake in a boat, there's so much toxic sludge and oil products floating on top that if you light a cigarette when you're going on the boat across the lake, that it could catch everything on fire. So there's like all these warning signs. And I don't know if fish live in the lake anymore. I think all the fish got killed. Lake Ural? Might have been Lake Ural. Or Ural. So all these countries, there's been really bad environmental stewardship. I would call this, in Austrian school economics, tragedy of the commons, because there was not private property in a lot of these countries. So if the person owned private property, there would have been a better incentive for them to maintain the fish supply, or for them to protect the land, the air, water, and soil from being destroyed. Look what China has done with rare earths mining. If you want to see something absolutely horrible, look at what China used to do for rare earths mining so they could have the lowest cost rare earths and bankrupt all the private sector commercial producers in the United States and elsewhere. Like literally all the air, water, and soil around the rare earths mines in China are all fallout zones. Like people get cancer very quickly. It's a true tragedy. And China didn't care about that for a long time. That's how they were able to produce rare earths at the lowest cost, and why they're able to bankrupt all the other rare earths producers. Yeah, I think the main problem, in my opinion, is poisons and chemicals in the air, water, soil. They cause a bunch of immense problems. I've had someone try to explain this to me in the past, and it's just so depressing. I don't want to hear all the problems in the air, water, and it's unbelievably, you can't fully stop it. Helen says bad weather has led to poorer harvests this year. Yeah, it sounds like it in the Midwest. They've had a lot of rain, and they had colder weather earlier than usual. So that's prevented the amount of planting seasons. That's what it sounds like for a number of crops. Well, they're increasing the amount of fish by fish farms, and that's disturbing too. There's a lot of problems with fish farms. I've had elk before. I like it. I like bison meat. Buffalo burgers. Those are pretty delicious. Okay, well, I will attach articles to what the Asian governments are doing to try to block African swine flu coming into their country. I will attach articles in the information and description section of the 2 large food companies that just went bankrupt in the last couple weeks for different reasons. Dean Foods, and then also Bumblebee Foods, but mostly Bumblebee tuna, and then problems with the global protein shortage and the amount of American farmers that the suicide rate, and also how Wisconsin dairy farmers are closing, the bankruptcies are closing at an alarming rate. But this is not going to end well. And these higher food prices don't seem to be benefiting a lot of people. So you would think that it would benefit some of these food companies and the farmers. It does not seem to be happening that way. Okay, well, that's it. I want to thank everyone for listening. I'm going to focus on unique content. I do cover a lot of interesting topics. Yeah, I don't know where Bumblebee gets their fish from. I haven't looked into it that much. I don't like canned tuna. My grandmother, when I was a little kid, my grandmother fed me that every day, and I won't go near. The smell of it makes me nauseous now. Okay, but thank you very much to my almost 200 Patreon account contributors, my dozen or so monthly PayPal contributors. People throw me a tip once in a while, so I can focus on creating unique content like this and taking a look at the different news stories and putting them together. But there are a lot of disturbing trends happening now to food companies, farmers, and people who eat protein. The evidence is just there that there's going to be a lot higher pork prices. People are going to get a lot smaller portions at restaurants. They're going to get a lot less bang for their buck. Their purchasing power is not going to go nearly as far, and that's a combination of factors, as I've tried to highlight.